Alright, what is poppin', people? We're here, back at it again. We got the double upload today, because we got the next slate of bands from Menu. How many Pokemon is this that we nominated? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 Pokemon were gotten on the slate. That's crazy. Fortunately, only 4 of them went. Out of the mons that we voted for, we got Linoone that was banned, Polteageist, Slurpuff, and Sharpedo. So, what's the theme of these bans? Well, it's offense. I think when NU had its tier shift at the beginning of December, it heavily favored super, like, high-paced offense builds. You got a whole bunch of sweepers, you got a whole bunch of really fast Pokemon as well, like, that had great cleaning potential late game. You know, some that come to mind are like Noivern, Scarf, Indeedee Male, even Sharpedo as well, which is on here. Raichu Alola, like under E-Terrain as well, even without like setting up. And we're starting to chip away a little bit at those. A lot of people had been, I think, complaining about the consistency of dual screens, which is kind of funny because we banned Aurora Veil, and yet manual dual screens is still proving to be a big issue. Large part because Magic Bound Sylveon just says, hey, you can't defog my screens anymore, smiley face. And there are also Memento Pokemon like Uxie that can support the drummers really well. So, when we look at the first mon that was banned, Linoone unanimously banned after barely missing out on a ban last one. What changed? Nothing at all. I think it's just Linoone's been in the tier a little bit more. And that's really how it is for most of these Pokemon. It's not that anything's necessarily changed per se. It's that as we've let them settle in a tier more, mons that were viewed as maybe more borderline, maybe the tier adapts, become more just seen as, okay, too much. And so with Linoone, realistically, you can't KO it very easily, because it's going to be behind dual screens when it's setting up, and it has Gluttony, which means you can actually activate those 33% health berries from only half. So you don't have to rely on citrus like something like Slurpuff. You get extra recovery. It's not much more, but it's something. And then you get a +6 attack stat Linoone with extreme speed. So the combination of Linoone being pretty much safe behind screens, and because of screens and extreme speed's priority, it's allowed to invest a lot into HP. It's really hard to actually safely revenge kill this. It's got enough coverage between like Stomping Tantrum, Throat Chop, and Seed Bomb to where even the monsters you'd view as like kind of consistent, like maybe Bronzong or Tyrantrum in some cases, or Palisand, monsters would otherwise be kind of consistent at dealing with it. I say kind of because there's only so much you can do to a Pokemon behind dual screens. They're no longer really able to remove it. It just kind of gets too many turns. Kind of too many turns, but it's just too safe of a Pokemon. There's so little opportunity cost when you're using it on screens because it sets up, and then what's your means of dealing with it outside of overloading it with priority and hoping that you could stall out screens well enough? Like, I also want to say it promotes toxic gameplay, but that phrasing means like nothing. So I'm just gonna say instead, dual screens plus extreme speed equal Pokemon hard to take out. Next Pokemon. I'll go to the next drummer. We got Slurpuff. Now this was a much closer vote. I think, yeah, it was a 6-3 vote on Slurpuff instead after going 2-6 in favor of staying. Slurpuff does legitimately have answers in the tier. You've got like Bronzong and what's his name? Oh, I know the Pokemon's name. Slowbro Galar. These are mons that can take a hit from Slurpuff, even at +6, and KO it. But it's pretty much the same case of Linoone, in which offensive counterplay is extremely limited. Even it's not as limited as Linoone, but it's still, you're limiting yourself to a very select pool of Pokemon, which means that this mon's gonna pretty much ravage through something like offense that probably doesn't have a way to deal with it. Despite it losing return as well, Slurpuff's still, like, you are only really clicking player off anyway, and if you run into a bulky poison, there's a chance Facade still blows it back. A lot of the bulky poisons that could otherwise take a hit struggle if you're up against a spike stack HO team, because Glowbro doesn't run boots, Vileplume doesn't run boots, they want recovery, or in Glowbro's case sometimes an Assault Vest, or a Resist Berry like Shookaberry, or Colbur. And so much of the time, these mons, even though they could normally otherwise check Slurpuff, They're just put into its damage range so easily that they're no longer really able to handle it. And then to finish off our trinity of like setup hyper offense, it's Polteageist. Now I voted do not ban for Polte, and it barely got banned as well. It was a 5-4 ban vote. But the reasoning behind the vote for Polte is pretty much once it shell smashes, it's really hard to like outspeed. I think very few Pokemon outspeed it naturally. And while it's really frail, especially mostly on the physical side, it's got common support from Indie female through Psychic Terrain, which means that you can't actually use priority moves. So something like a Golisopod or something like Choice Banded Flygon with First Impression, or even like a physical Zoroark if you run into one of those. They no longer can actually deal with it. Polteageist ends up being safe from their hits. There are, again, I do disagree with the ban, so I'll give my take on this too. There are some mons that were able to check it. Again, I think like Umbreon pretty much made it so this mon could never do anything. You also had like Silvally Dark. I ran very bulky variants of Silvally Dark. It was pretty decent at checking Polteageist. And I also felt like a lot of the time, even with screens, it wasn't too hard to prevent Polte from being able to set up. Like, that really poor physical bulk is bad. And there are also other mons, like say Milotic can do Haze or Dragon Tail stuff with it. We got some normal types as well, so you could try to pivot around those if you need to get something in a position like Porygon 2, for instance. That's the big one. And then Porygon 2s are commonly running like Thunder Wave or Discharge in my experience right now. So you could even get that paralysis potentially off, which is, you know, that's gonna make it so Polte doesn't do much. But at the end of the day, am I complaining about a Polteageist ban? No. I just feel like it maybe had potential to be fine down the road. And then we got Sharpedo. 6-3 ban vote as opposed to it going, I think, 2-6 no ban last time. This is a mon that originally I voted no ban for because I felt, there are enough bulky water types, and there are enough random rogue priority moves from Pokemon like Golisopod and Flygon and Toxicroak. And then I used Sharpedo in one game, and I got outplayed every turn until Sharpedo swept by itself on the once it was him versus like 6 Pokemon, I one-hit everything late game. And now obviously I'm hyperbolizing, I think that's the verb. You know, this is hyperbole from me. But Sharpedo's counterplay is extremely limited. Yeah, it's frail, but it just kind of protects versus the first impression mons. And frankly, Toxicroak isn't all that common in my experience right now. So you don't really have many, like, in terms of fighting type priority, it'd be Vacuum Wave and Mach Punch. You don't really see any Pokemon of those right now. And like Bullet Punch from something like a Machamp or Pangoro isn't really threatening Shark. And it's generally just a really easy Pokemon to support to get its checks, which, you know, there are a fair amount of checks. Things like Beware, Vileplume. These mons do check it. But it's not hard to put them in range of KO, like KO range. And as I say Vileplume, the more I think about it, the less I'm sure that it actually checks Shark. Milotic's a better mention there. The main kicker to Shark, though, is it can go physical or special, and that really does change counterplay to it. In physical, you're looking at Protect, Waterfall, Crunch, Psychic Fangs, or Close Combat. I refuse to acknowledge Flip Turn on that Pokemon. It's not good. Stop trying to convince me it is. It's not. Whereas with special, you're looking at like Hydro Pump, Dark Pulse, Ice Beam, Protect. There are a couple Pokemon that can sort of check both variants, like Guzzlord, for instance, was getting some usage because CC Shark wasn't too common at all. Special, if you're like Spadef Gastro, avoiding flinches, you do check it, and you can like Toxic Stall. Toxic plus Life Orb Recoil Stall, frankly. Milotic still checked special sets just because of how bulky it is. But like in general, the counterplay just isn't really consistent with Shark. And I think the diversity offered between both physical and special sets really did push it over the edge. And then I'll talk a little bit about both, of course, like we always do, we gotta talk about the rest of the slate too. So Toxtricity, it's up here again. It's still doing the same stuff, really. I'm surprised that it didn't get more than one ban vote. Toxtricity's defensive counterplay is admittedly kind of limited. You've got, like, what? Palisand, Rhyperior, sort of normal Rotom. I can't imagine you taking Choice Specs Overdrive well, but I guess you sort of handle it. And then there are enough mons that like live a hit and threaten a pretty insane amount of damage back. And Toxtricity's not really that fast. I think the main seller or main kicker against it is the common set of specs with like Overdrive, Boom Burst, Volt Switch, and then Sludge Bomb. I haven't seen like any Snarl run on that. But that common set, locking into one move, like of any of those moves, can leave you exploited by a lot of common Pokemon. It's like Bronzong can switch in on your Sludge Bombs and Boom Bursts sort of well. Copperajah, similarly, if you're going for Overdrive, of course, you're inviting an Electric Immune Pokemon. It's a mon that very much needs to predict properly to Wall Break, and because it isn't super fast, and because it's always, again, it's pretty much always choice locked, there's a lot more room for error, I think, with Toxtricity. I feel like that's generally why we're fine with keeping it around for now. And then Indeedee Female. I disagree with the talk that Indeedee Female is as problematic as male. The damage fall-off's noticeable, the speed fall-off's also problematic, because it means you're speed tying with base 85s now instead of just outspeeding them. I mean, that's really all it is. I think it's just easier to handle because it's not as strong. I mean, it does get more utility, which is cool. Being able to run Healing Wish is cool to support certain HO breakers that also have sweeping potential. I do think maybe the Polteageist ban and Linoone bans, I think those kind of... Actually, not the Linoone ban, my bad there. The Polteageist ban, I think, probably pulls people a little bit away from the Indeedee hate hype train. Mostly because it enabled Polteageist so damn effectively. But we'll see. And then Beware's up here. I didn't vote ban on it this time because I honestly just haven't seen enough of it since the last slate to feel comfortable voting ban on it. I mean, realistically, Beware's still nigh unwallable. Double Edge, what's the fighting move run? Drain Punch, I think it usually runs. Drain Punch or Close Combat, and like Darkest Lariat. Doesn't really have counterplay. I say it doesn't have counterplay, it doesn't really have good switch-ins. But I think people feel that it's slow enough and frail and like exploitable enough by common special wall breakers to where it's hard for it to find great positioning throughout a game. You really have to get it in through pivoting and just versus bonds that it's able to, you know, sit in front of and not care too much. Then we get the PZ ban vote. This time 4 to 5. Maybe next time we vote ban on it, it'll actually go. But again, I think the main issue is people feel that finding the right move to lock into is so hard, which is why I'm not sold on choice sets being the best with PZ. It's like, no matter what coverage you have or what coverage move you choose to use, you gotta predict right. It's like Toxtricity, except faster in that it's kind of easy to pivot around in the sense that, yeah, it's super strong, but you got enough mons that it resist or are immune to the moves it wants to use. Again, I think this monster's ridiculously strong. Adaptability, Tri-Attack, please get this out of my tier now. I think maybe Agility could be cool. I think one of the big issues that people probably would levy against PZ is it's kind of slow. So maybe just, you know, negate that. And then we get Tyrantrum. It's pretty much the same deal as last time. It's strong as hell. It can run CB, it can run Scarf, it can run DD. I just think there's enough tools in the tier to pivot around its head smashes and outrages. And locking into outrage in you right now feels really punishing. Mostly because I think Sylveon's just super dominant. So if you ever lock to outrage, you're just losing your Tyrantrum. Probably should run Dragon Claw in that case, but if you're running D-Claw, then you're just not as effective as breaking. Eh. Main idea that I'm trying to convey is, I think I can pivot around it well enough. And then we got Glowbro, so I voted ban on this because Quick Draw is uncompetitive. I'd like to see more discourse around a Quick Draw ban. From what I've seen, it's very unlikely to happen because of the whole like policy review thread that was preferring to ban Pokemon to abilities. But I really do think that just a blatant luck element like Quick Draw should probably get explored. Pokemon's already a game of variance because you've got damage rolls, you've got arbitrary mischances forced into moves. I don't think we need to promote the variance aspect of it even more. And in the past, we've banned abilities like Sandveil and Snowcloak. We have an evasion clause in place, even to this day. We've banned abilities like Moody because they just are inherently uncompetitive. I don't really see why this would be any different. Mienshao, it's just, I think the main reason for that is it's really strong. It's pretty much Passimian, but buffed up a lot. A little stronger, much faster, but frailer. I think the tier's fine, though, in terms of the fighting resist we have, so I'm not too worried about it. The Sigilif ban vote, I'm surprised so few Pokemon voted ban. I think Sigilif's counterplay is just incredibly porous this gen, because all you really have are Pokemon that outspeed it. My main issue with Sigilif, though, this gen, because it does the same stuff in each gen, my main issue with Sigilif is that it just makes passive Pokemon like a dead team slot. You give up too many opportunities for Sigilif to come in and wall break if you have something like a Milotic out, or like a, let's think of another really passive Pokemon. Milotic, Gastrodon, these kinds of mons that just can't really threaten it at all. And its coverage is so plentiful, so you really don't have coherent switch-ins ever outside of like P2 or Umbreon. I think the big difference, though, between generations and why I really think Sigilif, has so much more freedom now, despite losing Z-moves, it lost, it didn't lose, but Pursuit's gone. And so Sigilif's never really going to be punished for trying to wall break. Unless it gets lured in by some, like, offensive variant to the mon it wants to try to switch into. It has a lot more freedom this gen to just move around throughout battle on its own, making use of, like, Magic Guard and Roost to stay healthy. I think that's more than enough to get rid of it. And then last is Raichu Alola. Admittedly, I haven't seen much of this Pokemon. I still voted ban, though, because I feel that there's really not a whole lot going against it. There's not a whole lot stopping it from rising voltaging its way through teams. And it's got enough coverage between, like, Rising Voltage, Grass Knot, and then a Psychic move. I think Psyshock, because you use an Astapod. The one issue I guess I see with it is NDD has been kind of common, and so just removing its terrain is a big step towards neutering it, and it forces you to run Pincursion, which is an objectively bad Pokemon. I won't listen to any other statements. No. But yeah, I don't think the opportunity cost is all too high. Though there are two other issues too. One, first impression weakness and Sucker Punch weakness, for that matter. Those both suck. And oh, what was the other one? There was another issue I was going to have, but I forgot. So it must not be that big of an issue then, huh? That's crazy. Anyhow. Oh, I remembered it. Finding chances to set up's kind of hard. Not that Alola needs them necessarily, because Rising Voltage under terrain is strong as hell. But I do think it's something to at least note. That's it though. I'm happy with this slate because I hate queuing into Hyper offense so much. I hate dual screens. It's just so boring to match into. Like, oof. And I also think that the Pokemon that we banned just had so much snowball potential that was really hard to keep a lid on. So I'm glad to see some of that removed from the tier. I don't like promoting matchup within the tier. I say as I've, voted to not ban Drought before. That's beside the point. I think generally people will, like, throw shade at Smogon tiering for banning offensive threats and keeping defensive threats around. I will say that a lot of the time it's because these offensive threats just have so much more potential to dominate a game than a defensive threat does. And so it is a little bit harder to look at a defensive Pokemon in a needs to be banned light, unless it's just an incredibly heinous case, like, to my understanding, Mega Sableye in Gen 6 OU, or, like, Chansey in Gen 5 UU. God, what's another example? Porygon 2, even in this gen of NU earlier. Yeah, leave your thoughts down below in the comments about how you feel about this ban slate, and if there's anything else that you wouldn't mind seeing banned. That's gonna be it for me, though. Hope you guys are enjoying your day, your evening, your morning, your Sunday, your Tuesday, your Friday, your Christmas Day, whenever that happens, your Hanukkah. Holidays are good. I'll see you guys next time, though. Peace.